This is the Lean Construction Blogs Podcast, a podcast dedicated to stories, case studies, and lessons learned of applying lean construction from around the world. Join Dick Beyer as he interviews industry leaders, lean construction practitioners, and subject matter experts to help you improve the build environment in general and your design and construction projects in particular, advance your lean journey, and bring your continuous improvement efforts to the next level. Let's get started.
Welcome, everybody, to the podcast. I'm Dick Beyer. Today, I am joined by really an amazing woman. I'm so happy to have her on the show. Architect and planner with 20 years of experience or more working and managing construction projects, Luciana Burdi, who has innumerable degrees, unbelievable amount of awards. It's just, you're just a dynamo. And thanks for taking out a little bit of time in your day to spend some time with the podcast folks.
No, thank you, Dick, for inviting me. I'm always very excited to share, and especially with you after we have been working together for a while. So it's great to see you and to be part of the podcast.
Great to see you. As a matter of fact, we were just reminiscing before we started recording that we got together on a project probably 20 years ago.
It was in 2007.
Oh, okay. 2007. Almost 20. Yeah, and it was a women's prison.
It's a women correctional center. Yeah, it was I think the Commonwealth of Massachusetts first lean light project. So a lot of new things we were doing it, and I needed all the support from you and everybody else. But it was a great example. So yeah,
we had a lot of fun. I remember we were doing the parade of trades with a whole bunch of people from your team and your staff. And for people, I mean, I think most people on the podcast have probably played the parade of trades, but it's a game that shows that reliability, slow and steady, is a really good way of doing things. And I remember it was take your daughter to work week. So a bunch of people had their kids there, and there was this one little girl who kept going around to the other tables, unlike adults who just sat there, and she was looking at the dice, and she figured out that the dice
yes, that's true.
were loaded. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And she said, "Mommy, these aren't the same dice as they have." Oh, here we go. So thank you for that. It's been great. I haven't seen you in a while. And since then, you are now the Director of Capital Programs and Environmental Affairs. I just noticed. Yes, for MassPort, which is everything that flows in and out of the greater Boston area, right? And you fly in, you drive in, you boat in.
No, we don't boat. We cruise ship, yes, cruise ship and flying, yes. So we do. We manage all the construction. We develop the SIP, the capital investment plan. Yeah, MassPort is a great organization, and we do a lot of work, and we're continuing. Passengers are coming back after COVID, so it's all positive. Thank God.
Wow. I went to Middlebury College, so I spent a lot of time landing and taking off from fog-bound Logan Airport back in the 70s when it wasn't quite as nice as it is today. Yes. So you guys have done a great job. Another thing that you and I have in common is that I'm a credentialed mediator and was the head of the California Dispute Resolution Council for like 3 or 4 years. And you teach negotiation and conflict resolution over at Worcester Polytech.
Yes. And I'm a mediator here at the court. I don't do it anymore, but that's how I got into lean and conflict resolution. Yes, I do teach conflict resolution at WPI every year. Yeah.
Share with us before we go through your whole background, so share with us the commonalities that you see between what we're trying to do in lean construction and make things a little less adversarial in that kind of ADR world that exists out there.
I would be happy to. I think one of the big commonality is the active listening, right? I can go through many. So active listening is critical to both. The ADR, obviously, if we don't listen, this is where the major conflict they become. But if we look at the lean, there is the active listening, it's a critical element too. I always tell my staff, just because MassPort does in some way the typology of building that we develop and we do and design and build are the same, like terminal runways. So it's easy to assume that is exactly as it was before. And I tell them, just listen, just before we jump to design, the active listen the operation, how operation change, listen how the passengers change and their requirement, their needs are different, especially now after COVID. So it is that's one of the major element. The other one is really thinking about the process, what's happening and when it's happening, and who is who owns it, who's your customer. From my perspective, customers change depending on what you do. Yes, my client is aviation or maritime, the customer are the passenger. But oftentimes, one of the things that I teach and I discuss with my staff, I say the customer, when we have to pay a bill, the customer is not the passenger. The customer is the person that we have to pay the bills to. So the contractor might be our customer. This is very foreign to my staff who believes we are the customer. And so those are a couple of elements that I think link the two.
It's interesting because I started my life as a commercial litigator, and I did really complex commercial litigation, which was basically either securities or construction. And I always wondered how these construction disputes got into the kind of conflagration that they did. Like I had early met Kurt Detman, who was working with us, and you've worked with Kurt before. And his first job really as a lawyer was to settle like $400 billion worth of disputes on the Big Dig or something. And it always seemed to me that ADR was, when we were mediating, there was still a dispute. If you could get ahead of it, if you get to the front of the line and stop the dispute somehow by getting people to work together, active listening, by, knocking down some of those heuristic biases and different things, it would be great.
Another big element to me is focusing on the problem instead of the people. Both in ADR and in lean, we often focus on the person. And both practices are teaching us that we should focus on the problem, not on the people. So if we all look at the problem together, we can resolve it instead of just, just focusing on people. Those are great points. Yeah.
That's a really great low filter analogy, as I like to call them, because I think problems themselves are not adversarial, right? Problems are just problems.
Yeah.
But people is what makes it adversarial.
Yes.
That's where the fight starts, because a problem never fights with itself, right? It just happens to be a problem, and you have to deal with it. Well, that's fantastic. So you started off, so you're from Italy. Are you from Venice? That's where you got your architectural degree?
Yes, I'm from Bari, which is all the way south in Italy, but I graduated in architecture from Venice, yes.
And then did you go right from there to Harvard? Is that what?
So my story was, it's a little weird.
Which is why you're here. Exactly why you're here.
Yes. So I graduated from Venice, then I went back to Bari for a couple of years. I was always fascinated with the United States. These are, Happy Days, all the stuff that we watch on TV. And I know it's kind of funny, but it's true. I loved books, I love research. So I was fixated to come to the United States. One of the big challenges is that I couldn't speak English. So I was 28 and I couldn't, so my mother was saying, Luciana, it's great you want to go to the United States, but you don't know English. And at that time, they were not teaching English in any of the schools. So I really could barely say what my name was and how old I was. So I have relatives in Chicago. And my father, who's an engineer, said, okay, why don't you spend like 6 months, hang out with your cousins, and you go work in an architectural firm. So I ended up in Chicago for a year. While I was there, another of my cousins was here in Cambridge. I had no idea about what MIT and Harvard were, honestly. So he came and he said, Luciana, why don't you come to visit me here? There are a couple of good schools. So I came here, and through, different, I actually still remember landing in Logan in 2000. It was a horror story. I'm like, where am I in this tube? Because there was a lot of construction happening here in Logan. And I ended up doing a special program in urban and regional studies at MIT, and then my doctorate at Harvard School of Design. Yeah.
Fantastic. There's probably not a better place to land than Chicago for an architect to kind of get to see, what's great about the U.S. And Boston is a really iconic architectural place as well. I got married at the Old North Church there many moons ago with all my friends. Okay, so then you moved from Harvard and MIT. I mean, that's just like, people would like to have that just as a mention on their resume rather than how deep it is. But you've taken that really into the whole, from, I think you were DCAM first, right? And
yes,
then you moved over to MassPort.
DCAM. Yeah,
the DCAM is the Department of
Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Even at Harvard, I was fascinated with the public sector. My mother was a teacher, so I think I grew up with the sense of civic and dedication to the public sector. And this is where we did the prison, our first BIM project, the Fitchburg State College Science Building. Yes, yeah. So I spent there 8 years. And then I moved as a deputy director at MassPort. And in December 2020, the director retired, and I was lucky enough to get the position as director.
Well, luck is the residue of design, as they say. So your hard work paid off, and you're loving it, I'm assuming.
Yes. Very fascinating, very diverse type of work, all different. It's a learning. I think my father is 93 in a week.
Oh, wow.
He's telling me that we die when we stop learning. So it is, I continue to learn every day, and I love it.
It keeps me going. I mean, people say, are you going to retire? And I say, I think, it's like a shark who stops swimming, right?
Exactly.
You just sink to the bottom, and that's it. So I love doing this. So do you and your family live in a 3-story walk up in the North End?
Yes, we used to live there. Yes,
oh, perfect.
We used to live there. 3 kids. I love the North End. We had to move out when we was a 690 square feet apartment, so it was a little tight when the third one came. So we had to move out, but we still, I still go in the North End. My Italian heart stays there.
All your buddies.
Yes.
Okay, so the kinds of things that you've been doing at MassPort, in addition to being in the public sector, and you're very much involved in CMAA, which is really the kind of public owners association for the states.
Yes.
And they're very active in, I know I've done a number of workshops there in Lean, and you're very active with them. So you teach, you run a big capital program that's got $8 billion or $10 billion or some amazing amount.
Yeah, it's 2.8 for the next 5 years, but we have a backlog of another 5. So
I was close right there.
The math works.
Close to 8, especially if we do escalation, which in COVID times we have learned is an important part of our contingency, right? Yeah, completely crazy. So you serve on the National Board of Directors of CMAA. You teach at Worcester Polytech. You work in the capital thing. You raise a family, and you're very active in the Italian American community. So when do you sleep exactly?
I actually go to bed very early at night. It gets 9:30, doesn't matter. I need to have my 8 hours sleep.
That's fantastic. Well, I mean, you're just such a great example of really having a balanced life that touches a lot of both social and intellectual pieces. So what was your thesis on at Harvard?
Actually, the thesis was developing a tool to increase collaboration through the approval process. In Massachusetts, it's called the Article 80. It's a process in which a lot of public development have to go through to get approval from the community, from the city, and is managed by the city. So I took that process, I process mapped, that was my first process mapping.
Awesome.
Yes. and I developed a tool, a prototype for a tool to increase collaboration. So all the elements that I'm continue to do, that Lean taught me, collaboration, visualization of data to make better decisions, it's all kind of the same thing. Yeah. In reality, it was a little different than the usual design, fancy design that you get out of Harvard. So in truth, I had to work to find the right advisor because the intersection between technology, design, and process was a novelty for the GSD as well.
Can't imagine. We need to get you into Toronto to help with the SPA, the site plan approval process, and the rezoning process, because I work on a lot of these very big projects, including a new medical school at the University of Toronto, which is very cool, since I moved up to Canada. And
I didn't know you moved to Canada.
So this is really interesting, actually. In 1942, in 2016, I got a call from the TSPC, which is Public Works, basically, in Canada, the Federal Public Works, and they're redoing the center block Parliament buildings. And they said, we really need a lean guy, and we want you to come up here. And I thought, well, this would be awesome. This would be a great kind of end of career, go work on the Parliament buildings, just kind of hang out. And so I moved here in 2016. I moved here 3 weeks after Trump got elected. So I've been able to avoid that, which is great. And now I've developed, we've developed really a good practice here in Canada, helping people with lots of buildings. And so I tried to lean up the government, and that was a little more difficult than I thought it was going to be. But we made some strides, and we delivered some early enabling projects. An 8-month project, 3 months ahead of time, and
nice,
40% under budget. And I said to them, "That's not a miracle. You just over budget and over allow time." So what we did is we just found what was the sweet spot for actually delivering it. So that's how I got up here. But we could really use you on site plan approval and zoning, because these things take years and years and years, and they add so much to the cost of projects that could be fed back into the project. So I'm going to have to pull out your thesis and send it to the folks at the City of Toronto. You just won a big award for innovation from the Construction Institute.
Yes.
Which is the Construction Industry Institute, I guess, CAA, which is the most prestigious arm of the AGC. So you've got the owners going, you've got the contractors saying, we love you. You have a design doctorate from Harvard. You just need to now start working with the trades. I think that's where you need to.
Yes. I just need to help with the trades. I didn't get there yet.
All right, so let's go back to the Women's Correctional Facility, and let's talk about your journey in Lean and how it's impacted what your programs are now. I know that was a really interesting program, because it was we were trying to get modular cells into a prison that were at the end of a rail spur, and we were going, gosh, we could just extend the rail spur. So tell us about how you started thinking about Lean, how you got first involved, and how you said, we need to do that. So
I got to Lean through BIM, building information modeling, and this is kind of different than the usual thing. So in early 2000, I started to get involved in, also because of my GSD experience, into building information modeling. So we started implementing it at DCAM, but I realized that what we were doing, we were just swapping CAD with BIM. So and because of my strong interest in process, I realized that switching technology without really understanding the process of applying technology does not bring any benefit. So I start to research what type of processes work well with the new technologies. And I ended up in Lean. I think there was the Lean community practice was the first time that in New England they were forming the Lean community practice. And I fell into a couple of meetings and I was like, okay, this is what I'm looking for. And I fell through it, kind of luck, by searching for how to do better, for how to deliver better projects. At the end, ultimately, it's delivering better projects. So I ended up there. And, I think you need to I asked, at that time, the commissioner of DCAM was David Perini, a great mentor of mine. And you need to have leaders that allow you to experiment. So I was lucky enough to have David when I went to him and said, I would like to try new processes in this project. And we all know the public sector, the processes are very, very organized. There is very little wiggle space to make any modification. He said, go ahead, try it on your project. So I had to strong arm a couple of lawyers at DCAM. I remember one of them saying, this is the first and the last time we're going to do this. And guess what? It was the first, but definitely was not the last.
Fantastic.
Yes. And we brought in the CMAA risk early. We didn't do the full Lean, obviously. The first time was 2007, 2008, and we were just still putting our toes into the water. We did collaborative decision making. We did value stream mapping. I remember a huge effort. We were through the programming phase, we realized that the intake process was not large enough for the addition. So and the process in the Commonwealth is we had to go all the way to ANF to ask more money. We needed to ask additional money. And I used the value stream mapping. I actually mapped the intake process and all the different types. Was educational for the sheriff, or educational for the people there, for the operation, and was also educational for us too. And by that exercise, we had no problem in requesting additional funds to be able to cover additional scope of work needed to make the facility function properly. So it was all positive. It was fascinating, and they're still using it. The other things that I think is critical is that we're talking 2007, 2008. We are still connecting to each other. We're still going out for dinner. Is the relationship building that we built. Oftentimes, you get to design a construction project, you don't want to see the contractor ever again, right? Here is the opposite. And to me, that's great. You build a relationship, which for me, it's very important.
And that's both really important and also very difficult to do in the public sector. In Canada, you can't buy a federal official a cup of coffee, because they're worried about the perception of whatever. So it's very difficult to create that kind of relationship that's so important to trust development. I mean, if you don't know people and you don't understand them as people, when the river hits the road and there's a clash, you can't kind of take a breath and go, I know this person's a good person.
Yes.
I mean, listen, it gets back to your active listening, I think, I need to listen extra hard here because I'm not seeing what they're saying and I need to take that time. So that's fantastic. So you took the Lean, it's interesting because when you say we didn't do the full Lean, the integrated form of agreement had just been drafted. Will Lichtig had just drafted that in like 2004 or 5. So even the whole contract form was new. And I've always thought that any amount of Lean is better than no Lean. So I don't like to call it Lean light. I just call it Lean. We're leaning it up.
I know. There are people that are Lean purists that if you don't have an IFOA, they're saying, oh, you don't do Lean. And
I know.
I answer, listen, we cannot do it because of our Massachusetts general law, but I do have a lean addenda, a lean exhibit, because I want to make sure I buy the behavior. If I don't buy the contract because legal requirements cannot, it doesn't mean, I agree with you, it doesn't mean that I cannot do lean. And we have seen benefits in MassPort too. Our first project, we were able to shove 3 months away. We were 3 months late. So
I think I have trouble with lean theorists myself, because they don't get into the trenches and actually have to deliver projects. It's like, I'm a drive-by consultant and, we're okay. In my practice, I love being a partner in an IPD contract, because then I have the gravitas of having my own stake in the game.
yes,
As opposed to just being a consultant that can sit back and criticize and not do the dirty work. And I think that's one of the things I found, is that you start applying these methods and people start changing, but you have to take them where they are, because general contractors have Primavera 6 schedules and CPM management, regardless of what you try to do to tell them it's not very effective. And they use construction management software that minimizes their risk and maximizes change orders. But that's what they've invested, millions and millions of dollars in these things. And so you have to find the people in the organization that go, yeah, let's make our schedule look like our pull plan, right?
Yeah.
And make that work. So you went on, you did Fitchburg State. So you're doing corrections, you're doing colleges and universities now for DCAM. And then when you moved to MassPort, you had all of a sudden like a gabillion
all new things,
different challenges.
Never done any airport before.
Well, it sounds like every day you get up and you do something that you haven't done before, which is pretty cool if you think about it. I think that's where the educational stuff comes in. So when you took, and you also did, I think, an employment development program at DCAM, or an employment engagement. So in some senses, when we talk about the customer, I think as a manager, your staff and your people are your customers, because you have to deliver things that they don't even know are necessarily available to them. So tell me about the employment engagement process, because I'm really interested in that.
No, we have done a lot since I started in 2012 at MassPort. First things that I did, I gave a yellow belt, Lean Six Sigma yellow belt, to my entire staff. So everyone in my staff is yellow belts. There are a few green belts, but I think this gives a good foundation of what are we trying to do, understanding what waste is, where, value stream mapping, understanding the process. In the past year and a half, I actually developed internal lean design and construction training. So there were, so I based on the quote unquote MassPort way, because we have limitation. We have a framework that we have to play within, right? Our MassPort, Massachusetts framework, legal framework. We were able, and after all the learning in the past 10 years, we developed an internal 6 classes of lean design and construction, which was blessed by the LCI. I wanted to make sure that the LCI, I used some of their documentation. I also did a test for my staff. This is where my teaching, I love doing this. And now we are in the fall, we are starting a second set or more in-depth lean design and construction. It's the more advanced modules in which we are basically training not everybody. The previous set was for everyone, but manager, assistant director, those people that have to facilitate, that they have to, I want them to be more involved. At the same time, the CEO noted the value of this. So she asked me to develop 3 classes that are basically distributed to the entire MassPort, which is great. and they are taking the lean design and construction learning and put them a little higher because, as you mentioned, lean teaching can go on anything. I tell even my admin, you could use, value stream mapping, tool planning to deliver me a memo. So you need to know when I need the memo, who needs to review the memo, when you have to start it. So you can use the teaching of lean on anything you do. So the CEO noticed this, and we developed 3 high-level class for the entire authority, which was was great for me because I basically now everyone, even in other departments, understand what a condition of satisfaction is. So when I say, okay, I need an EOA for a meeting, they know what an EOA is, and they know how to do an EOA. So those are little things that make a huge impact.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's all about outcome-based planning, right? Know where you're going, because for so long we have just started off in a direction and that direction then tells us where we're going. And you go, well, that's crazy. Why is that so crazy? So I've come up with this idea about conditions of satisfaction in our business, because I think there's been so many different variants. And so I've gone back to Fernando Flores and his kind of construct and how important it is that if you ask somebody to do something, they fully understand when you're going to be satisfied.
Yes.
Right. So as an owner, I have posited that there's three basic sets of conditions that are part of conditions of satisfaction. So the first is this subjective kind of design aesthetic. What you want this thing to look like. So the University of Toronto and the medical school, one of their values, which we always start with the values workshop, is iconic. And so that's very subjective, but they'll know it when they see it, right? So you have to honor the fact that owners have these subjective values. And then you have objective values, which is like functional program, or, this is what the terminal has to do. It's got to serve this many passengers and it's got to do that. And then I add constraints to it. So we only have this much money and we only have this much time. Mm-hmm. And if you crank all of those things kind of into your value proposition, you go, okay, if we can deliver it within, how many ever months and so many billions of dollars, and it performs all of these functions and we love it, we've really hit a home run.
Yeah.
And so from years, and it's really interesting that you're designing these classes, because I taught lean design and construction at the University of Denver, and integrated contracting there. And it was hard for me to kind of figure out what of all the things that I do, I should put into a class that, was most basic about it, because I really have this kind of deep-seated feeling that lean design is different than lean construction. Mm-hmm. There are different, negative iterations and positive iterations in design that don't happen in construction. And so you have to approach it differently. So especially as a doctor of design from the most prestigious institution in the world, how did you come up with how do you think about design in lean terms?
I think design, and it's funny that you're mentioning it. Yes, I am an architect, but I also, because I'm an architect, I know that we will never finish design. So I usually push the consultant to stop, they love to jump into design. So a major effort that I'm currently doing on many projects, it's an education not only for my designer, but also for my manager and my client, aviation and maritime, is to think about what is the problem that we're trying to resolve, and what are the program piece? What are the elements that needs to be? Designers like to jump and start designing. And I tell my client, I can design anything, but I might not be able to meet your operational requirements. So let's talk before we put a pencil down on a piece of paper, or the model and model on the mouse. Let's think about what do we want to design. So we are taking more seriously in some way the programming phase, the study phase, try to understand who has done it before, what are the questions that we're trying to resolve it before. And this is, it's been a little difficult because obviously even the client wants to start seeing building. And I'm like, I can build anything for you, but just a couple weeks ago, I was doing one of these effort conditional satisfaction with the client, with one of my operational people. And they said, oh, Luciana, just give me more square footage. I will be happy. And I said, I might give you more square footage in the wrong location, organized in a way that does not meet your requirement, you will not be happy. So trust me to tell me how you're going to operate this piece of the terminal, and trust that I will give you anything you need. You might need different type of square footage. You might not need more square footage. You just might need less. Organize it differently. So it's educational. And when going back to your question on the classes, when I looked at the classes, because of these 10 years of experience here at MassPort, I look at what are the fundamental element that really apply to every project. So we are talking about conditional satisfaction. We are talking about the EOA, have a clear agenda of what you want to get out from a meeting. Give it ahead of time, right? The last planner system, the full implementation of the last planner system. I think that's the easy things that I'm expecting on any project. Continuous learning, so retrospective are critical, not at the end. CBA, choosing by advantages, and A3s. So the choosing by advantage, and then A3 for a CBA. Choosing by advantages is we always get to a point in which we have multiple options. And the worst we can do to the client is have one vocal person make the decision. So the more I call it objectivize. I'm not really sure if that's an English word. The more we can, is it? And sometimes I invent words. So
make up words all the time too.
I make up words, yes. So,
the principle of simultaneity.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
I use it.
Yeah, perfect.
So the more we can objectivize the process of selection, I think the better it is. And we have done a couple of times with the clients, and then they look and said, oh, there is very little to argue about this. I was like, yeah, because it's as objective as we can do. There is always a little piece of subjectivity, but it's as objective as we can do. And then we track it. And so minutes of meetings, how decisions were made is critical. So I think those elements, every project should have it. Lean or not lean, it's a good project management.
It's very much that the taxonomy of my classes where I ended up, because I agree that, and that's what we teach on every project with owners. And these bigger projects are better because then you can be more embedded with owners and you have a greater chance to get them moving. And so everybody loves choosing by advantages. I think that the reason that they do is because owners are always accused of not making decisions.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the prime suspects. And the project was late because nobody made a decision, right?
Yeah.
And I think largely that's because they don't have a decision-making mechanism.
Yes.
And at least choosing by advantages gives them that.
Yeah.
Now, if there's political decisions to be made, I mean, I'm sure you have to deal with that all the time. They just get made. But if you want a real decision, you have, all your sets that you have now windowed down to 2 or 3 different options, and you're very specific. If you're specific about the criteria, and what the differences are, then I think it works really well. I think people tend to start with very large things, like it's got to be lovely. Okay, that's a hard thing to choose by advantages.
And you are making a good point. The definition of the criteria is the most difficult part, and I'm still struggling with the managers and make sure that they understand the criteria and the factors. Those are the most difficult, and then identify which one is the paramount, right? So those 3 elements are the critical in CBA. But after you have done that, everything comes very quickly. So I usually, the CBA to me, it's, I ask manager to just focus one session, one meeting with the clients to understand the criteria and the factor. Just let's understand, did we forget anything that we really have to, that it's critical to make a decision. Yeah, that's a good point.
When Bill Seed was at UHS, he used to use A3s and CBA for good, better, best. And he would decide, so he didn't always choose the one that had the most advantages, because the great thing about CBA is that you can decide whether you're going to pay for those advantages.
Yeah.
So we often accept, number two, because it's less expensive. And if you're in, you're in the Northeast, at least in the old days, if you were in the Northeast, you didn't need as much air conditioning as you needed heating, right? Yes. These days, you never know.
These days, never know, exactly.
Yeah.
No, but that's a good point. But at least it's transparent. And if someone 5 years from now asks how did that decision was made, you have it, and you people can kind of go back and say, okay, now we understand why that decision was made.
So it sounds like you have taken your interest, maybe this came from your father's engineering or your mother's teaching or a combination of both, which is a great match, because I think of myself, and I think mostly what I do is teach, at the end of the day. And I had a grandfather who was the chief pinstock engineer for the Bureau of Reclamation. So he had to design how those gears opened up to let the water through dams. And it was always fascinating to me. So, but I think that the interesting thing is that you seem to have a real affinity for designing process.
Yeah.
That you started even your PhD thesis, and it sounded like some of the work that you were doing back even in Italy was very much about, all right, let's sit down, let's think what the process is going to look like, because the process is going to lead to an outcome. And if you start with the outcome and say, we need to lead to the process, then it's really just pull planning. Yeah. But what we're always trying to get teams to do, and this is the most frustrating thing for me, I think, is that I like to say that cost is an input to design and not an output of design. So most of our designers, in order to understand cost, they design something and then they send it off to be costed. And then that comes back to them as a reflection and they go, oh, that's too expensive. As opposed to sitting there with an estimator or a cost person or an active cost model and inputting cost into every bit of the design as it progresses. And I think that's really hard. And that's why we still have designers, every once in a while, they'll go back to their DD, SD, DD, and CD progression. When I try to get them to, look at the most important problem, look at the highest cost driver, look at the things that are most difficult. Take your design to construction documents almost. So we know we've solved that one. Don't worry about the steel stairs. We can do steel stairs in our sleep at night. We don't have to finish that. Let's focus on this other stuff. So how do you direct your consultants and your design team kind of to be disciplined around that?
Yeah, TVD, the target value design and target value delivery, is critical. And I don't think the consulting community understands and knows how to really implement it correctly. I think I was able to implement it well at DCAM in the correctional facility. Here, I think because I'm a little removed, I'm not the project manager, I'm kind of 2-3 level up. They're still learning. My staff and the consulting team still learning. But what we had at the correctional facility, I had an estimator in the room at every meeting. And I still cannot get that in my project, but you're 100% correct. TVD is critical, and do it well. Make cost as part of the design and not, okay, we have the design. Okay, do we give them more money or do we value engineer out? Which is, I hate that word. It is because it's not done correctly.
Always costs you a program, right? That's value engineering as it's done in the States now. It's like the knight in Monty Python, just cut off the arm. That's how we're going to get there.
Yes, yeah.
It's crazy.
So what I do now, what I try to do is the must have, should have, and nice to have. So when we define program, I ask the consultant to put it in bucket. There are things that you must have to meet your operational needs. There are things that we just finished a meeting last week on similar things. We do not have enough funds. And then we have the must have, the should have, and then it would be nice to have. It's a good way to separate what it's really needed. Is forcing the client to make decisions as well. And it's an easy way to say, okay, maybe it's a multi-phase project, and it's one of the approach that we're currently using. But TBD, it's my next goal for full implementing. So one step at a time.
Yeah, well, I have a really cool full day workshop I can share with you on.
I'd love to. Yeah.
You start in the morning with nothing, with $10 million donation from a guy, and you end up at the end of the day with a fully designed and priced building.
Oh, wow.
And it's a full day workshop, and there's designs floating around and all kinds of stuff. So I'll share that with you. I'm working on one that's a Lego one where I'm pricing Legos both for the cost of the Lego and the labor that's an increment to it. And so anyway, I'm working on that stuff. I'll keep you in the loop.
Yes, please.
Which reminds me of one of the challenges that I find, because I do lots of work in the public sector, obviously. And it seems that the most difficult thing to change is the procurement system, to get away from low price and get to more of a value basis for organizing teams. So what have you seen in your career with that, and what have you tried to do to help that? Because you said, and this was Michael Bidet, who was the head of LCI for a while at UCSF, he had to do an IPD-like contract inside of a design build contract where he had an IPD team as the design builder, because the state of California thought sharing profit was giving money away, and that's a felony. So I'm sure you have the same problem.
We have similar constraints. So the way the procurement in the Commonwealth works, that we, for example, for vertical construction, we cannot do design build. We have to do design bid build for anything that is below 5 million construction. For anything that is above 5 million, we should do CMAA risk. So, and this is where I took the consensus docs and some of the lean documentation, and I developed a lean addenda, a lean 2-hour contracts. Obviously, I had the LCI review it because I just want to make sure that follows the rules. But in the consensus docs, I actually they took back what I gave them, because I could not even apply fully the consensus docs element into my contract because of the limitation. So for design bid build, we have to select the lowest bid. And even in CMAA risk for the trades, which are the major trade partners, mechanical, electrical, we have to select the lowest bid. The way to do it, though, is that we can pre-qualify. So if I spoke with the Inspector General and the Attorney General's office, which I communicate often with them, and they tell me all the time, Luciana, you can pre-qualify. You can put in your pre-qualification process can be as stringent or as loose as you want it to be. So sometimes I put, when it's very, very critical, I put some of these elements into the pre-qualification process. That allows me some flexibility, and then I have to work with the lowest bid too. I can do design build in only horizontal projects. So we are actually in the process of our MassPort second ever design build. The last time there was a design build project was 2008, 2009. I was not a MassPort, and we got sued because of process-related challenges. It's interesting. So something that I'm doing now before I'm putting out the RFQ for the design build, it's understanding the process going back. I want to make sure that the process that we're going to follow, it's obviously follows the rules, but it's very clear to everyone.
So it's interesting. This is something I'm running into not only here, but in the States as well. And Christian Pikelma and partner down there is running into the same kind of stuff. That people are trying to move to a more collaborative model, but they're kind of stuck with legislation and these other things. So one of the critical pieces of integrated project delivery is the validation part. So you go through validation that's when you get the team on board, you're designing something that you think you can build for the money you have. And at the end of that validation piece, there's a go, no go for the owner to decide, are we doing this? So I'm trying to get that into progressive design build. I'm trying to get that into CM at risk so that we are focusing in that period. Because the CM at risk is, and other collaborative models, leave the designer out of it. And then you need to have a design watchdog on your side, as opposed to just having, a single designer that's working through this stuff. So I'll keep you in the loop on that, but I think that's one of it sounds like that's the challenge that you're trying to overcome as well.
Yes.
Is how do we make sure that we're not going to the market with a bunch of people that don't understand what we're trying to do?
Yeah, no, I'd love to follow up with you on this. Yeah.
Perfect. So what's next for you? I know you have limited time, and I really appreciate you taking time today, but what's next on your calendar other than President of the United States? Or
I can't. I'm not.
Because you were born
I'm
in
not
Italy.
an American.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not born in the United States. No.
Well, move to Canada and you can be prime minister. No problem. We'll be happy to have you.
I'm not sure politics. It's what I like to do.
Yeah.
I love continuing doing processes. It's my goal is we have a big effort in, and as we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, the capital program that was approved by the board is the largest that MassPort ever had in its existence. So because of my interest in research, something that I'm fascinated and I would like to start tracking all the value and, developing white papers, try to really develop KPI and track the KPI. So it is maybe because I work on, because I teach, I think it's critical that we record, we track, and then we share our knowledge. And this is the reason I got the award in Construction Institute, is that anything I learn, I always make it publicly available. And it is because I feel inside myself a really public employee, but I think anything that we do and develop, we are in the public sector, is our duty to share with other organizations. So I continuously talk still with DCAM, but with other public organizations here. And I will continue, MassPort gives me the ability and, lucky me, give me the ability to test this. And I feel my duty to test it, to learn and share the learning with everybody else. So that ultimately the industry will become a better industry. So I will always put everything on my website. So please tell all your followers that anything we work is going to be on our website, available for everyone to take it and do even better.
MassPort.com?
Yes, MassPort.
Okay, MassPort.com. So along with KPIs, which I think are crucial because everybody wants to know and know how to measure, and that's one of the weaknesses of IPD is that there aren't really many accountability triggers. Yes. So you have to figure these things out. But I've been working on KBIs lately, which are key behavioral indicators. Trust, collaboration, communication. How well are those things working on the team, and measuring those as well. Yes. Through, when we do our reflections every quarter, we have a Survey Monkey that goes right to communication, collaboration, trust, all those different things that are a little amorphous out there in the universe. But I think they're just as important as schedule and money and all those other kind of KPIs that we track. So you might throw that in the mix.
Yeah, no, that's I wrote it down. See, I have always my pen, a little piece of paper. See, I learned something new every day. So
how did people do that? Pen and paper thing. It's kind of crazy. Well, Luciana, it's been fantastic. thank you so much. It's so good to see you. You look great.
Thank you.
You're just doing so well.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to see you too. I always love to talk to you and always follow you on LinkedIn. You're always fascinating things that I learn a lot from you. So thank you for inviting me. It's really
We're just trying to make stuff up, right? And
no, you don't.
As my friend Bill Proctor at the California Prison Project said, okay, first you make stuff up, and then you go make it be true. So that's what we love. So thanks again. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for giving us an hour of your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you down the road.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lean Construction Blogs podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please help us spread the word by sharing, subscribing, or leaving a review on your preferred podcast listening platform. Remember to join us next time as we continue to lower the barriers to applying lean construction and help take your lean journey to the next level. And don't forget to visit the Lean Construction blog to stay up to date on our latest podcast episodes, weekly blog posts, monthly webinars, and upcoming conferences. We hope to see you on the next episode.